Hello everyone, welcome to the IMF webinar series. Today I'm going to talk about the tragedy in Nanda Devi. Before that, a quick introduction about myself. I am Amit Chaudhary. I am currently the President of the Safety Commission at UIAA and Chairman of the Steering Committee at IMF. Martin Moran, who had led more than 40 treks and climbs on peaks in the Himalaya, was in India in May 2019 to lead an expedition on Nanda Devi East with fellow British mountaineer Mark Thomas and 10 clients of the Scotland-based family-run Moran Mountain Company, founded in 1985 by Martin and his wife Joy. In September 2015, Moran and Thomas had attempted the unclimbed northeast ridge of Nanda Devi East, which has only one existing route to the summit. The southeast ridge, just about 500 meters short of the top, the ridge narrowed into a sensational knife edge of unconsolidated snow. Faced with a 500-meter horizontal section with 65-degree powder snow flutes to the north and overhanging mushrooms on the south, they decided to retreat. Their high point was at 6865 meters. Moran returned to India in May 2019 to lead an expedition to Nanda Devi East, this time over the established route along the southeastern ridge. The team of 12 set off from the village of Munshiari on May 13th and reached Nanda Devi East Base Camp after a 6-day trek on May 18th. Here they divided into two groups. Let me familiarize you with this area. This is Uttarakhand, and Uttarakhand, as you know, has two parts, Kumaon and the Garhwal. Nanda Devi is located in the eastern part of Garhwal, and the approach is through the Kumaon Himalayas, which is Pithoragarh, Munshiari and Martoli. This is Nanda Devi. This is the approach from Martoli into this valley. It's called Lavagad. This is Longstaff Col, and this is Nanda Devi East Peak, the main peak being here, and this area is the Nanda Devi Sanctuary. Mark Thomas, along with 3 British climbers and 3 Sherpas, went along the Longstaff Col on this ridge to open the route to the Nanda Devi East, which was the main objective of the expedition. Meanwhile, Martin Moran, along with 2 American climbers, Ronald Beeman, Anthony Sudicum, 3 Britons, John McLaurin, Richard Payne, Rupert Weville, an Australian Ruth McCance, and the Indian liaison officer Chetan Pandey, went off to climb the virgin unnamed 6477 peak. They set up the summit camp at 5891 meters on the ridge. Though it had snowed a few days earlier, the weather on May 26th seemed perfect. It was a bright, clear morning. As you can see from this picture, the team probably set out at early to cover the last 500 meters to the peak, about 900 meters distance on ground, which they should have covered in 3-4 hours and made their way back to the comfort of the base camp by the evening. This is an actual shot of the team setting out to set up summit camp probably a day prior and moving up on this ridge. On their summit attempt, they might have probably moved 50 to 100 meters from their summit camp when an entire slab on the ridge broke away, taking all the climbers with it. Roped up, the climbers had no escape and collided with rock and ice in their steep fall of 200 meters with absolutely no chance of arresting themselves. Even if they were alive after the fall, they would have all succumbed to their injuries by the time the tragedy was discovered 3 days later when they failed to turn up at base camp. On 29th May, Mark Thomas, on his return from setting up Camp 2 for the climb to Nanda Devi, expected to find Moran's team back in base camp. He hadn't been able to raise them on the walkie-talkie, even though they were supposed to be within line of sight. Fearing the worst, he set out to search for the missing climbers. He could see a tent, but no sign of people. Hardly a few meters from the tent, there was evidence of a large slab avalanche having broken off the ridge. He sensed something was very wrong when he searched the area, whistled and shouted for them, but couldn't find any trace of the missing climbers. He quickly set up a camp helper to raise the alarm at the nearest village. Unfortunately, the satellite phone at Martoli was not working, and it was only by late afternoon on May 31st that news of tragedy reached the IMF, and the local authorities could be alerted in Munchiari, the subdivision of headquarters. The district administration dispatched a team of 10 from the newly set up disaster relief force to base camp. Ill-equipped and without mountain rescue training, this team could barely move halfway to base camp. The information at this stage was sketchy. The news from Munchiari was that Martin Moran with 7 climbers had set off to climb somewhere near Longstaff Col, and they were missing since May 26th. A few calls to the district administration made me cognizant that they had neither a clue about the situation nor an immediate plan. Fortunately, a request had already been made for the Indian Air Force to deploy rescue helicopters. IMF member Dhruv Joshi was in Almora, freshly returned from a 2-week spell at 5,000 meters and preparing to leave for a mountain training selection camp at NIM Uttarkashi. When he was told about the tragedy, he drove up to Pithoragarh immediately, anticipating active participation in the rescue effort. At IMF, we quickly got 3 mountaineers on their way to Pithoragarh by June 1st. Helicopters arrived. The DM briefed the rescue team. For some reason, didn't include Dhruv in the search operation, even though he was fully acclimatized and geared. It was already 5 days since the climbers were missing. The chances of their survival seemed bleak, and the need to act swiftly and decisively was vital. Yet for some reason, the order to first airlift the other group of mountaineers at base camp showed a complete lack of understanding of the situation by the district administration. Zachary Quinn, Kate Armstrong, Ian Wade, and Mark Thomas, who were perfectly fine and waiting to join the rescue effort, were rescued from base camp and brought to Pithoragarh, where they were sent for a medical checkup and then confined to the ITBP camp. Before bringing them back to base camp, Mark Thomas was taken on a flyover mission, but they were unable to spot the climbers. June 3rd dawned and no one as yet knew anything about the rescue plan. Dhruv, who knows the area like the back of his hand, implored the DM to let him join the helicopter search to locate the victims, but he was not allowed to do so. Finally, Mark was sent with the Indian Air Force pilots who did a high pass over the area to take pictures. When they returned and looked at the photos zoomed on a large screen, they saw what appeared to be 5 bodies to the south of the ridge at the bottom of what looked like an avalanche chute, 4 huddled together and one lying at a distance of 30 meters. Mark and the IMF mountaineers were denied permission to go look for survivors. Another attempt was made on June 5th with ITBP mountaineers. The plan was to go in close, look for survivors, winch them up if possible. The ALH Air Force helicopters unfortunately didn't have enough power to carry out the operation at 5,600 meters where all the bodies were sighted, and the rescue plan was abandoned. All attempts by IMF and the rescue agencies appointed by insurance company to find a civilian helicopter capable of winching at that altitude and arranging a winching crew failed. Chances of survival being impossible, the efforts now turned to launching a ground party to locate and evacuate the bodies. We quickly assembled and sent a team of 12 fully equipped mountaineers who, along with 2 support staff, established base camp 3 kilometers southwest of Pindari Glacier on the true right bank of the Pindari River on June 13th. Meanwhile, the DM of Pithoragarh, initially having decided to abandon the recovery process until post-monsoon, ordered an ITBP team to Nanda Devi East Base Camp, where they were airlifted on June 14th. The decision to drop unacclimatized mountaineers at 4,500 meters is questionable, and one wonders how the ITBP leadership overlooked this decisive factor. The weather in Nanda Devi region, particularly in the Pindar Valley, was harsh, with fog and snow a daily occurrence. In the north, the valley leading to Longstaff Col had better weather, and the Polish team attempting a celebratory climb of 80 years of the first Polish ascent of Nanda Devi East were advancing well. Meanwhile, the ITBP team was making slow progress towards the accident site. The IMF and ITBP teams were to meet up at the accident site on June 23rd, but whiteout conditions on the south of the ridge prevented the IMF team from making headway. The ITBP team located 7 bodies, but were unable to find the 8th missing person. They did not reveal in what configuration the bodies were found, and we haven't seen the pictures they clicked. The IMF team members seen here in the picture, who met the ITBP team the following day to decide the next course of action, reported that the bodies had severe injuries sustained from hitting hard rock and ice. One can only guess the sequence of events. The 200-meter fall from the ridge, a vertical drop of 160 meters corresponding to a slope of 40 degrees, would have been the perfect angle to generate an avalanche. It had been snowing for a few days prior to 26th May, and with 2 to 3 feet of snow accumulation, soft snow on old hard ice on what appears to be a cornice would have triggered a slab avalanche while the climbers were walking over it. Hard ice would have broken away and hit the climbers as they struggled to maintain balance on the sliding mass, coming to rest at the bottom of the slope. There was absolutely no way that the bodies could be moved down from the Pindari Glacier site, and it would be impossible for the already exhausted rescue climbers to move the bodies to the other side of the ridge. Air effort was deemed necessary and cheetah helicopters came in for a recce on June 28th but failed to land. It was then decided to get ground reinforcements to move the bodies to a lower spot on the north side of the ridge. ITBP meanwhile had sent a 30-member team who now got involved in the task of moving the bodies. Finally, on July 3rd, the 7 bodies were airlifted to Pithoragarh for identification and onward to Haldwani. Thus came to an end one of the most tragic accidents in the Indian Himalaya in recent memory. The heroic efforts of the ITBP men and IMF mountaineers will be remembered for time to come. 3 of the climbers' remains were sent back to their countries and the rest were cremated in Haldwani. Their ashes returned to their kith and kin. Meanwhile, the 8th missing climber, Martin Moran, rests in peace under the shadows of the Nanda Devi he so loved. Thank you very much for watching. This was part of the IMF webinar series, which is bringing you insightful, informative, and interesting stories from the Himalaya. Thanks.